The best-of-7 World Series is now tied after the LA Dodgers defeated the Toronto Blue Jays 5-1 last night in Game 2 of the Fall Classic. Joining us now is Scott Stinson, Global News sports contributor and, of course, longtime sports columnist. Scott, it's so great to have you on.
Thanks for having me on.
You know, that was a tough loss last night in Game 2, but overall, I think on the back of that strong start in Game 1, Jays fans should be feeling pretty good. How are you feeling after last night?
Yeah, I think feeling pretty good if you're a Jays fan is kind of the right mood. They came into this World Series as pretty significant underdogs to an LA Dodgers team that are the defending World Series champions, and obviously the Jays haven't been back there in 32 years, so it was always going to be a tall task. And getting that big Game 1 win with all the excitement, and it was relatively easy as it turned out. A big victory for them. I think that gives them a lot of momentum. The loss on Saturday night obviously is a difficult one. They got shut down by a very good pitcher, but they sort of did what they needed to do, which was show that they could hang with a really tough Dodgers team. And now they go back to Los Angeles, and both teams have the opportunity to win three more games to finish this thing off.
In fact, let's talk about that really good pitcher because the Jays had just 4 hits in Game 2, and a big part of that was Yoshinobu Yamamoto. Now, this was his second consecutive complete game, the first in the World Series in 10 years. What did you make of Yamamoto's performance, the significance of it?
Yeah, I mean, frankly, it was ridiculous. You just don't see pitchers go that deep into games anymore. The way modern baseball works is you're often hoping you get maybe 6 innings out of a starter, and he just, after a bit of a rough first inning where he gave up a couple of hits and then managed to work his way out of it. After that, those early innings, he just started to be basically unhittable. And you mentioned the Jays had 4 hits. Really, only two of them were good hits. A couple of them were kind of lucky flukes. And for the last 6 innings of the game, they didn't get any hits. So once a pitcher starts sort of rolling like that, you can kind of feel that this game was starting to slip away from them. It was close for a while. Kevin Gausman, the Toronto starter, did a great job himself. He only had one run into the middle innings of the game, but then he gave up a couple of home runs in the seventh, and you started to feel like, uh-oh, that might be all she wrote, because they just weren't getting anything off of Yamamoto. So sometimes when that happens, you have a great starting pitcher against you. It's always going to be a tough hill to climb, and the Jays just weren't able to do it on Game 2.
Yeah, you've written in your column on Global News' website, which I recommend that our viewers read, that he was pitching like he was furious. It has been interesting that so far the big superstars on both sides, Vladimir Guerrero Jr., Shohei Ohtani, they really haven't been the story. Is that likely to continue?
Well, you'd think not. I mean, these guys are so good. There's so many big stars on both sides. Guerrero, obviously, Ohtani for sure, Mookie Betts for the Dodgers, George Springer for the Jays. There's lots of guys out there who you would expect eventually will kind of take over a game or have the big hits. It's been the story of the Jays basically all season has been that they get contributions from all up and down their lineup. So they would be hoping to see that continue. They're not relying on Vladdy Jr. to necessarily save them or George Springer to necessarily get the big hit. But it wouldn't be surprising if they did too. Obviously, we saw Guerrero with a huge performance against the Yankees and again against Seattle in the last round. And of course, George Springer with a huge home run that clinched Game 7 for them. So the Jays will be hoping their big bats come through, and they will also be hoping that they can keep the big bats on the Dodgers silent, I would think.
Yeah, it wasn't fun to see him get hit on the wrist, though, last night. Anyway, they get a day's rest, and
No.
then the action shifts to LA. The big question is if the Jays can get their offense going after, it was shut down so effectively last night. What will you be
Mhm.
watching for in Game 3?
Well, the thing against the Dodgers is you have to hope that you don't get that kind of pitching performance very often that they had. As we've talked about, Yamamoto was unreal on Saturday night. They face a guy in Game 3, Tyler Glasnow, who is another free agent signing that the Dodgers brought in, who was a star elsewhere. The Jays unfortunately have some experience with him in the playoffs. He was pitching for the Tampa Bay Rays in one of the wild card series that the Jays lost a few years ago, and he has all the capabilities of being a very good effective starting pitcher himself. But we've seen already in these playoffs that there are a lot of times good starting pitchers come into a game against the Blue Jays and they manage to wear them out. That was the recipe for their success in Game 1 against the Dodgers. It's how they got through the series against the Seattle Mariners, who had a lot of very good starting pitchers themselves. So really, they're just, I'm sure the strategy is going to be do what the Jays have done all year, which is try to make a lot of contact, don't strike out a lot, try to work into long counts, force the pitchers to make a lot of pitches, and then eventually try to get into a LA Dodgers bullpen that is definitely not one of their strengths. So that was the formula in Game 1. It worked. It didn't work in Game 2 because Yamamoto was so good, but they'll basically try to run back the Game 1 script in Game 3 against Glasnow.
All right, so the action might be shifting south of the border, but I don't think the excitement's going anywhere. What have you made of the buzz? You know, this is something you've been covering for your entire career, but the fan frenzy this postseason, what have you made of it?
Yeah, it's really interesting to see how this stuff evolves. You know, the Jays have been in the playoffs a few times in recent years. They hadn't won a game in the playoffs for almost 10 years until a few weeks ago. And really, once the momentum starts, it's fascinating to see how it spreads. You know, there's been big crowds at Maple Leaf games and Raptors games who are all kind of watching the Blue Jays on their phones while they're sitting in their several $100 seats. And you know, other public events, people are talking about the Jays, and you walk around downtown and there's jerseys everywhere. It's been really interesting to see how that kind of momentum gathers. Well, last time we saw that in the city, obviously, was the Toronto Raptors in 2019. But this is kind of the baseball version of it, and I don't think that's going to stop anytime soon. You know, the series does shift to Los Angeles, but the start times are all the same. It's not like they're 10 o'clock starts. It'll be the same normal times, and I think everybody will be tuning in and watching and seeing if they can keep this run going.
Yeah, I love that for us working the morning shifts here at the station. But Scott, we leave it there for now. Game 3 is Monday night in LA. Thanks so much, Scott, for your time today.
Okay, thank you.